My husband finally touched the sky with a $33 million buyout, but as he reached for the top, he used his other hand to push me off the ledge. He handed me a legal exit strategy and claimed I was yesterday's news, a shadow that didn't fit his bright new world. What he failed to realize was that the sun he was basking in only shone because I allowed it. He'd spent so much time looking at the dollar signs that he never actually read the name of the person who authorized his fortune. The narrative begins by painting a portrait of quiet, invisible labor. For 12 years, Daniel Ross was the silent engine behind the Elevate consulting machine. While Maya leaned into the spotlight of high-stakes networking, Daniel was the one fixing the server crashes at 3 a.m. and balancing the ledgers that kept her dreams solvent. He was the support system, a term Maya once used with love, but now spits out like a diagnosis of a terminal illness. The atmosphere shifts from the warmth of a shared home to the sterile chill of a corporate takeover. In a mere 17 minutes, the history of their marriage is rewritten as a business liability. As Maya pops the cork on a vintage bottle with Derek, the man she chose to replace Daniel both in the boardroom and the bedroom, the betrayal is finalized. The introduction concludes with the ultimate rhythmic drop, the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place, locking Daniel out of the life he built, carrying nothing but a laptop bag containing the very power Maya thinks she just stole. The ghost of the man Daniel used to be still lingered in the cracks of the sidewalk outside their Gold Coast townhouse. He remembered the winter of 2013, when the wind off Lake Michigan felt like needles, and he had worked 16-hour shifts, IT support by day, freelance coding by night, just to ensure Maya didn't have to take out a single loan for her MBA. He could still see her sitting at their cramped kitchen table in their first studio apartment, her eyes bright with a hunger he mistook for shared ambition. "We're a team, Dan," she had whispered, her fingers interlaced with his. "Once I build this, we'll never have to worry again. It's our empire." He had believed in that hour with a devotion that bordered on the sacred. Every server he migrated in the dead of night, every weekend he spent debugging the back end of Elevate Consulting while Maya was at networking galas, was an investment in a future he thought was mutual. He had been the invisible foundation, the rebar inside the concrete that allowed her to reach for the clouds. If you've ever poured your entire soul into building someone else's dream, only to find yourself standing alone in the rain, you know that the weight of that silence is heavier than any words. It's a journey that leaves scars, and if you're willing to walk this path of justice with me, perhaps hitting that like button is how we stand together against the cold. The locks didn't just turn, they clicked with a finality that echoed down the empty street. 3 hours earlier, the atmosphere inside that house had been electric, but the current wasn't running toward Daniel. Maya had walked through the door draped in a trench coat that cost more than their first car, her heels clicking a rhythmic, predatory staccato on the white oak floors. There was no "hello, honey," no celebratory embrace for the $33 million merger they had supposedly worked toward for a decade. Instead, she moved toward the wet bar, her movements fluid and detached. She poured a glass of Krug, the bubbles rising like the ego she had spent years inflating. When Daniel reached out to touch her shoulder, she pivoted, her body stiffening as if his contact were a contaminant. She didn't look at him, she looked through him, toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed a city she felt she now owned. Without a word, she reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a heavy, cream-colored envelope. She slid it across the marble countertop. It didn't slide like paper, it slid like a blade. "Drink up, Daniel," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth that had once been his home. "Because this is the last thing you'll ever get from me." "I'm not being cruel, Daniel. I'm being efficient." Maya finally looked at him, and the woman he had loved was gone, replaced by a polished, corporate shark. Beside her stood Derek, her vice president of strategy, his hand resting just a bit too familiarly on the small of her back. The betrayal wasn't just in the legal papers, it was in the smudge of Derek's cologne in Daniel's living room. You're a steady man, Dan. Your IT manager, steady, she continued, her lip curling in a faint, pitying smile. But Elevate is moving into the stratosphere. I need partners who can navigate the air up there, not someone who's happy staying on the ground. You're dead weight. You're a reminder of a version of me that I've outgrown. She gestured to the door, where his single suitcase had already been placed by a hired security guard. Derek and I have a flight to Dallas in 72 hours to finalize the Henderson deal. By the time I'm back, I want you sent out of this house. She turned back to Derek, laughing at a joke Daniel didn't hear, leaving him to realize that 12 years of devotion had been appraised at $0. The guest room in his father's modest home smelled of cedar and old books, a stark contrast to the sterile, high-end fragrance of the life he'd just lost. Daniel sat on the edge of the twin bed, the blue light of his laptop illuminating the lines of exhaustion on his face. Maya knew him as Daniel Ross, the reliable IT guy. She didn't know Kevin Williams. Years ago, using his mother's maiden name to keep his personal life separate from his high-stakes consulting, Daniel had built a reputation as the ghost auditor. He was the man multi-billion-dollar firms like Henderson Global hired to perform deep tissue security and integrity checks before a merger. He opened his encrypted email client. There, at the top of the inbox, was a formal summons from James Henderson himself. Mr. Williams, we are moving to the final stage with Elevate Consulting. We need your final signature on the risk assessment and integrity report by Friday in Dallas. Your word is the final word. Daniel stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the keys. For a moment, the pain of the divorce vied with the sudden, cold clarity of his power. Sometimes, the world breaks us just so we can see how the pieces actually fit. If you've ever felt the sting of being undervalued, tell me in the comments, how would you react if the person who threw you away suddenly realized you held their entire future in your hands? The phone rang at 4 a.m. It was James Henderson, a man whose voice sounded like gravel and old money. Kevin. Sorry for the hour, but we've had an anonymous tip. Some concerns about the internal culture at Elevate. Rumors of ethical lapses and potential reputational risks involving the CEO and her VP. Daniel leaned back against the headboard, the irony tasting like copper in his mouth. I'm aware of the rumors, James, Daniel said, his voice steady. I was actually preparing a deep dive into the CEO's recent conduct. Henderson let out a heavy sigh. Good. That's why you're the best. I've moved the signing up. We're doing it Friday morning, 9 a.m., in the Dallas boardroom. I won't put a pen to paper until you sit across from these people and tell me they're clean. I'm trusting you, Kevin. Don't let me buy a sinking ship. Daniel hung up and looked at the divorce papers sitting on the nightstand. Maya had wanted a man who lived in the stratosphere. It was time she learned that the higher you fly, the harder you hit the ground when the engines fail. Daniel returned to the townhouse one last time to collect his father's old watch, the one he'd left in the safe. He brought his father, a retired cop with a back like a steel rod, as a witness. Maya was there, dressed in a power suit for her pre-flight briefing, her face turning a blotchy red the moment she saw them. I told you to stay away, Daniel. You're trespassing, she shrieked, Derek hovering behind her like a loyal dog. I'm getting what's mine, Maya, Daniel said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a new, resonant weight that made her pause. He didn't look like the man who had pleaded for his marriage 3 days ago. He looked like a man who had already moved on to a future she couldn't see. When Derek tried to step forward to intimidate him, Daniel's father moved an inch, and Derek quickly reconsidered. Enjoy Dallas, Maya, Daniel said, his hand on the doorframe. I hope the deal is everything you've sacrificed your soul for. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew exactly where they would meet next. The private car waiting at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport bore a small, discreet sign, Williams. Daniel slipped into the back of the black sedan, the leather cool against his suit. Throughout the flight, he had reviewed the integrity clause in the Henderson contract, a clause he himself had drafted for James 2 years ago. It stated that any moral turpitude or undisclosed personal entanglements that could lead to a conflict of interest would be grounds for immediate nullification of the deal. At the hotel, the staff treated him with the whispered reverence reserved for the industry's most lethal kingmakers. He spent the evening looking out over the Dallas skyline, the $33 million deal hanging in the air like a storm front. He wasn't doing this for the money, he didn't need it. He was doing it because for 12 years, he had protected Maya from the world, only to have her join the very wolves he'd kept at bay. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he felt a strange sense of gratitude, not for the betrayal, but for the clarity it brought. Before we reach the final boardroom, take a moment to reflect on your own worth. Sometimes we are the silent architects of other success, and it's okay to finally step into the light. Thank you for staying with this story, your support means everything to the journey. The boardroom of Henderson Global was a cathedral of glass and mahogany. Maya and Derek were already there, sitting on one side of the massive table, preening like victors. They were whispering to each other, Derek's hand on her arm, looking every bit the power couple they imagined themselves to be. James Henderson sat at the head, looking at his watch. "Our consultant is here," James announced as the heavy double doors creaked open. Maya didn't even look up at first, her eyes busy scanning the final signature page of the $33 million contract. But as the footsteps approached the table and a shadow fell over the documents, she lifted her gaze. The blood drained from her face so fast she appeared to age 10 years in a second. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Derek's smug grin curdled into an expression of pure terror. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't scowl. He simply pulled out the heavy leather chair at the head of the table, the power seat, and sat down directly across from the woman who had called him dead weight 72 hours ago. "James," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the suffocating silence. "I've completed the vetting of Elevate Consulting." James Henderson looked between Daniel and the trembling Maya. "And? Do we proceed?" Daniel slid the contract toward him. He pointed to the line where the lead consultant's signature was required, the only signature that could trigger the release of the $33 million. "The name on this line is Kevin Williams, James. But you know me by my legal name, Daniel Ross." He turned his eyes to Maya, who looked like she was about to faint. "Maya, you told me I wasn't on your level. You told me I was a nobody who didn't understand your world. But the truth is, I built your world. I vetted your company. I'm the one who told James you were worth a look." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like thunder. "But the integrity clause is very specific. It forbids undisclosed relationships with subordinates that could compromise company assets. You and Derek didn't just betray a marriage, you created a massive legal liability for Henderson Global." The silence that followed was the sound of a $33 million dream evaporating. James Henderson's face went cold as he pulled the contract back toward himself. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice low. Derek tried to stammer an excuse, but Maya was frozen, her eyes locked on the signature, Daniel's handwriting, the same handwriting that had signed their wedding license, now poised to sign her professional death warrant. "I won't void the deal entirely, James," Daniel said, and for a fleeting second, a spark of hope appeared in Maya's eyes. "But the terms must change. Maya Ross is a liability. For this merger to proceed, she must resign as CEO immediately, forfeit her equity, and accept a minor consultancy role with no voting power." Derek is out entirely. If they refuse, the deal is dead. Maya looked at the papers, then at the man she had thrown away. She had her millions, but she had lost her crown, her pride, and the only man who truly had her back. Daniel stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward the door. He didn't look back to see her sign. He was no longer the engine, the foundation, or the support system. He was simply Daniel Ross, and for the first time in 12 years, he was walking toward a life that was entirely his own. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next